On a map, it looks almost too easy. Denmark on one side, Germany on the other. A strip of water between them so narrow it almost looks like a river. Draw a line across it and you have a crossing. But draw that line under the water and the map stops being simple. Ships move above it. The seabed shifts below it. Salt water presses in from every direction. Weather can shut down the work without warning. And two countries have to make one piece of infrastructure behave like one system. That is the Fehmarnbelt Tunnel. An 18-kilometer road and rail link under the Baltic Sea. And the real question is not why Europe is building it. The real question is why connecting two nearby coasts became one of the hardest construction jobs on the continent. To understand why this tunnel matters, we have to go back before the construction started. Back to the ferry, and a problem that two countries spent decades arguing about before they agreed to do anything at all. For most of the 20th century, the crossing between Denmark and Germany at this point was by boat. Rødbyhavn on the Danish coast, Puttgarden on the German side, a 45-minute ferry ride across a stretch of the Baltic called the Fehmarn Belt. Cars drove on, trains rolled on. Passengers waited on deck or sat in the cafe below. Then everything drove off the other side, and the journey continued. It worked. Millions of people use it every year. The alternative was not only slower, it was also unpredictable. For tourists, the ferry could feel like part of the journey, the deck, the sea air, the break between countries. But for logistics, romance is not the point. A truck does not care about the view. A freight train does not care about the cafe. A supply chain cares about time, reliability, and whether the route works the same way in winter as it does in summer, every day consistently. But for a freight network trying to move goods reliably between Scandinavia and Central Europe, a ferry crossing is a gap in the system. Trucks sit in queues waiting to load. Trains lose time at both ends of the crossing. Bad weather can close the route without warning. And the shortest path between Copenhagen and Hamburg, two of Northern Europe's most connected cities, is still interrupted by open water. The idea of replacing the ferry with something fixed had been discussed since the 1980s. Studies were done, routes were mapped, bridge options were drawn up, tunnel options were costed, but nothing moved quickly. Because two countries had to agree not just on whether to build something, but on who would pay, who would own it, who would be responsible when things went wrong, and how the money would ever come back. That conversation took the better part of 3 decades. In 2008, Denmark and Germany finally signed a treaty. A formal agreement between two governments committing both countries to a fixed link across the Fehmarn Belt. Germany ratified it the following year, but a signed treaty is not a tunnel. The moment the plans became public, the challenges began. German ferry operators stood to lose their business the day a fixed crossing opened. They went to court. Environmental groups raised concerns about what years of dredging and construction could do to the Baltic seabed, the water, and the species living around the route. German planning authorities required their own full approval process, separate from Denmark's, before work could legally begin on the German side. Denmark approved the project in 2015. Germany's legal green light only came after years of objections, court cases, and final rulings. So the first question this project raises is not an engineering question at all. Why does connecting two nearby coasts take so long just to get permission? Because at this scale, permission is the project. Every environmental study has its own timeline. Every legal challenge pauses the process while it is heard. Every national approval runs on its own rules, its own language, and its own pace. And if one part of that approval chain does not move, nothing else can start. That is the hidden cost of building infrastructure across borders. The concrete is not the only problem. The process is. But Denmark had already learned that lesson. Not here, but nearby. In 1997, Denmark opened the Great Belt Fixed Link, a crossing inside Denmark connecting the island of Funen to the island of Zealand, part bridge, part tunnel. 3 years later, in 2000, the Øresund link opened between Copenhagen and the Swedish city of Malmö. Road and rail on the same structure. A bridge on the Swedish side, an artificial island in the middle, and an immersed tunnel on the Danish approach. Both crossings are now running. Both are repaying their construction loans through tolls and rail charges collected from the millions of vehicles and trains that use them. The Fehmarnbelt Tunnel follows the same basic financial model. Denmark finances the construction and owns the tunnel. The money comes from loans. The loans are repaid through traffic revenue over decades. The European Union also supports the project because it is part of the corridor meant to connect Scandinavia with Central Europe. But the Fehmarnbelt Tunnel is more complex than either of those earlier crossings because this time the entire route goes underwater. No bridge section, no artificial island halfway across, just tunnel all the way from one coast to the other. Which raises the next question. How do you actually build 18 kilometers of tunnel under the sea? That is the first revelation. You do not drill it. You build it on land, float it out to sea, and lower it into a trench cut into the seabed. Here is what that actually looks like. On the Danish coast at Rødbyhavn, a factory was built for one purpose only: to manufacture the tunnel section by section inside a controlled building on dry land. This factory is the size of a small industrial town. 6 parallel production halls running side by side, temperature controlled inside because concrete reacts to heat, cold, and moisture. And at this scale, a problem in the casting hall can become a crack 40 meters under the Baltic Sea, years after the tunnel opens. Each tunnel section produced here is called an element. Each standard element is 217 meters long. That is roughly 2 full football pitches laid end to end. When finished, each one weighs more than 73,000 tons. Heavy enough that most cranes on Earth could not lift it. The element is built in separate segments joined together inside the factory. Once the full element is assembled, sealed doors are fitted at both ends. Those doors serve a purpose that sounds wrong for something made of solid concrete. The finished element has to float, not forever, just long enough to be moved from the factory to the sea. The basins beside the factory are flooded. The completed element is guided through gates into a holding area where it sits low in the water, mostly submerged, sealed at both ends, waiting alongside the others. But building the sections is only the first half of the problem, because at some point, each one has to leave the calm of the basin and enter the open sea. And that is where the difficulty changes completely. That is the second revelation. Getting a 73,000-ton concrete section across open water and down to the seabed is not just a building problem. It is a precision problem that happens to take place in one of the busiest stretches of water in Europe. Before any section goes in, the seabed has to be ready. A trench 18 kilometers long has been dredged across the crossing. Millions of cubic meters of material had to come out of that trench. And this is where the project becomes controversial again. Because dredging is not invisible. It disturbs sediment. It changes the water temporarily. It creates noise. It forces engineers to work around fish, birds, marine mammals, protected habitats, and strict environmental conditions. That is why the tunnel has never been only a story of engineering ambition. It is also a story of mitigation. Much of the dredged material has been reused to create new land, coastal habitats, and nature areas near the route. But the construction still has to be monitored, limited, and justified because the Baltic Sea is not an empty construction site. It is a living environment. Once the trench is ready, a layer of gravel is placed along its floor. That gravel layer has to be almost perfectly level, because the element has to rest on it evenly across its full 217-meter length. An uneven base means uneven stress on the concrete. Uneven stress on concrete underwater is not something you fix after the fact. When an element is ready to be placed, tugboats move it out of the harbor. A specialist vessel takes over for the final positioning above the trench. That vessel is called Ivy. Ivy was designed specifically for this project. It holds the element steady using dozens of winches and kilometers of steel cable. Those winches lower the element slowly toward the trench floor, a few centimeters at a time. Survey equipment continuously tracks the element's exact position as it descends. The element has to meet the previous section within millimeters, not meters, not even centimeters, millimeters. 40 meters below the surface, in moving water, with no direct line of sight from above. When it makes contact, the sealed space between the two sections is pumped dry. The pressure of the sea pressing in from outside helps push the sections together and lock the joint tight. The same water that makes this environment so difficult to work in is part of what seals the tunnel shut. That detail matters because many viewers ask the same question when they first see the animation. What stops it from leaking? The answer is not one thing. It is geometry, pressure, seals, ballast, monitoring, and maintenance, all designed so the tunnel behaves as one continuous structure after dozens of separate pieces have been placed underwater. But Ivy ran into a problem that had nothing to do with the sea or the concrete. Its operating approval came much later than expected. Not because the tunnel element was wrong, not because the idea failed, but because certifying a vessel built for a task never done at this scale takes longer than the schedule assumed. In May 2026, that finally changed. The first tunnel element left the work harbor at Rødbyhavn. It was moved into position by tugboats and IVY. And after a multi-day operation, the first element was successfully placed on the seabed and connected at the Danish tunnel portal. It was a huge milestone. But it also proved something uncomfortable. The original 2029 opening target is no longer realistic. Fehmarnbelt Belt now expects the tunnel to open in stages, with a revised timetable based on what engineers learn from the first immersions and the conditions attached to the German approvals. And that delay carries a lesson beyond this project. The thing that stops a mega project is almost never the thing everyone was watching. Not the concrete, not the seabed, not the water pressure, but a vessel approval, a planning condition, a rail section, a legal process, a part of the system nobody noticed until it became the bottleneck, which brings us to the third part of the problem. The tunnel is only one piece of a much larger system, and the system only works when every piece is ready at the same time. A tunnel that opens before the railways connecting it are finished is not yet a full transport link. It is an expensive hole in the ground with nowhere useful to send the trains. On the Danish side, the rail line between Ringsted and Rødby is being upgraded and electrified for high-speed operation. Bridges and road crossings along that route are being modified. New double-track sections are being prepared. On the German side, approvals are moving through the system one section at a time. That is why so many comments about this project focus less on the tunnel itself and more on the German hinterland connection. Because the full journey this tunnel is designed to transform runs from Copenhagen to Hamburg. That journey currently takes around 5 hours by train. When the tunnel opens and the rail upgrades on both sides are complete, it is expected to take roughly 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours changes things that 5 hours cannot. At 5 hours, Copenhagen and Hamburg are two separate worlds. At 2.5 hours, they begin to behave like connected cities. Freight can move by rail more competitively. Businesses can reach labor and markets faster. Passengers have a stronger alternative to flying, and the map of Northern Europe becomes smaller. But there is another question hidden inside that promise. Will the regions closest to the tunnel benefit? Or will traffic simply pass through them? That question matters because Lolland and Fehmarn are not just dots on a map. They are real places with local economies, tourism, jobs, noise, landscapes, and people who have to live beside the construction long before anyone else enjoys the faster journey. That is why the tunnel creates such strong reactions. To one person, it is European connection. To another, it is noise, disruption, and a threat to a place they care about. To a ferry worker, it may look like a disappearing job. To a freight operator, it may look like reliability. To a driver, it may look like 10 minutes instead of 45. To an engineer, it looks like a system where everything has to work. And inside the tunnel, once it is running, the system has to keep working safely for decades. The tunnel carries 4 lanes of road traffic and 2 railway lines in 4 separate traffic tubes. A 5th tube runs alongside for technical installations, maintenance, and emergency access. The design is built around one question above all others. What happens when something goes wrong? For drivers, emergency laybys and exits are built in at regular intervals. For trains, the approach is different. A train in trouble is safer moving than stopped. If it can keep going and reach open air at either end, it does. If it cannot, the evacuation routes inside the structure move people away from danger and into protected areas. Sensors watch the air, the temperature, and the traffic flow continuously. Control systems can close sections, change signs, manage ventilation, and coordinate emergency services from a central operations room. Because under the sea, the gap between a manageable situation and a dangerous one is narrow. And the systems that keep it manageable have to work before anyone inside the tunnel knows they are needed. So what does the project look like now? The factory at Rødbyhavn is running. Tunnel elements are being produced. The first element is already on the seabed. More sections still have to be lowered, connected, protected, and covered. And on both sides of the water, road, and rail, works continue to decide how useful the tunnel will actually be when it opens. This project has already survived decades of discussion, legal challenges from ferry operators, environmental scrutiny, separate national planning processes, a delayed immersion vessel, and a changing opening schedule. And it is still being built. Because the alternative is the same ferry crossing that has interrupted the route for generations. And because when the Fehmarnbelt Tunnel works, it will not just shorten a journey. It will change what is possible on both sides of the water. The public sees a line on a map. Builders see years of concrete, permits, weather windows, approvals, monitoring, and decisions that all have to go right before a single car makes the crossing. The public sees a shortcut. Builders see thousands of things that could go wrong. That is what turning a line on a map into something real actually looks like. Not one decision, not one machine, not one moment of engineering glory. Decades of argument, years of construction. A factory running on the Danish coast, a trench cut into the floor of the Baltic Sea, a vessel called Ivy lowering concrete into moving water, and a transport corridor waiting for the rest of the system to catch up. The Fehmarn Belt Tunnel is not finished, but the first piece is now in the ground. And that makes the project real in a way that no treaty, no map, and no animation ever could. A machine designed to turn water into connection. That brings us to the next story. Why building airports on artificial islands becomes one of the most difficult engineering challenges on Earth. Kansai International Airport sits on artificial islands in Osaka Bay. Runways, terminals, roads, rail lines, and fuel systems, all resting on land humans created from water. But beneath that airport is the real problem. Seawalls, reclaimed fill, soft clay, drainage layers, monitoring systems, and one question. Engineers can never stop asking, how fast is the ground still sinking? Thanks for watching BuildPulse. The biggest builds are never just concrete and steel. What project should we break down next?